If you've got a question, the voices of resin are here. Oh, PlastChicks.
PlastChicks is an SPE sponsored podcast.
Hey, Lindsay.
Oh, how is it going on this? Well, it's rainy for me. Is it rainy for you?
It is rainy for me as well. Yes.
Okay. It's world rainy. Well,
it's almost like we're in the same time zone.
Let's pretend we're in the correct time zone, Eastern.
So I'm Mercedes Landazuri.
And I'm Lindsay Neville.
And with our powers combined, we are PlastChicks, the voices of resin.
We're getting so good at that. I'm almost kind of impressed with us.
Lindsay I'll let you tell the people what your daily job is.
No, I really was hoping you would. So I am an upstream quote engineer at Cytiva. I don't know what I do yet because I haven't started technically. So
congratulations.
I do quotey stuff.
And I am a technology director at Peacock Colors and work closely with our plant up in Sheboygan as well, Vortex Liquid Color. Within SPE, I'm the counselor for Color and Appearance Division and immediate past chair of Recycling Division.
Oh, yeah. I guess I am the vice president of membership engagement for the executive board of the
Yeah, you're kind of a big deal. So we met through the plastics industry. We immediately were drawn to each other because we kind of look different and talk different than a lot of the people that we knew in the industry, and became best friends and nemesis, and and decided to start this podcast where we talk about all things plastic, and just so we could hang out more and talk more and learn more.
Love a good excuse.
So you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, iTunes or Apple, whatever, all the podcast places.
Just type in podcast and PlastChicks.
Or just 4spe.org/podcasts.
And you can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, the Facebook one was kind of like a byproduct of Instagram. I know.
Twitter, all the places. But enough about us.
Enough about us. Who do we have on today?
So very exciting. Today we have Dr. Chris DeArmitt. He's the president of Phantom Plastics and the author of The Plastics Paradox. So welcome.
Hi, ladies. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us.
So yeah, we're excited to have you on. I mean, we've seen you bopping around on LinkedIn and Twitter. Well, I don't know if Twitter. To be perfectly honest, I don't know Twitter. LinkedIn, but we always, see your posts on LinkedIn, see your comments on LinkedIn. And we're excited to get into this chat today. So I think the big thing that has kind of, your name associated to it is your book. And I guess let's start at the beginning. Why write this book? What brought this about, and kind of give us that foundation of what this book is all about?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I've only written one book before, and I have to be really angry to write a book because it takes so much energy, right? It's just horrible. You should try it. Well, you shouldn't try it. It's just.
I would have a lot of books. I have a lot of anger.
It's an awful ordeal, and you have to be passionate about something. And ironically, it wasn't passion about plastics that made me want to write a book. It was passion about the truth. So my daughters came home from school one day from the elementary school here, and they told me what they'd learned at school. And they've been told that plastics take hundreds of years to degrade. And, that's just scientifically wrong. If you take a plastic bag, for example, scientists have done this experiment. You put it outside and it falls to pieces in less than a year. So they're off, not just by a little bit, they're just massively off. So I've been on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley talking about this degradation of plastics within the body. This is one of my specialist areas where I've read hundreds of scientific articles. So I knew 100% this was just a lie. And I thought, first I was angry. I thought, how can my teachers, I'm paying insane property tax to pay teachers to teach my kids lies. And then I thought, well, teachers, they're just people like us, right? They just see stuff on social media. They pick up stuff online. They're not plastics experts. How are they supposed to know? So then I thought, well, somebody better tell them the truth. So, and no one else was doing it. So that's where my quest began. I started reading the degradation part I already had down because it's one of my areas, but then people would ask me about litter and waste and microplastics and so forth. So I had to read about 2,000 scientific articles to get all the facts. And that's a point to make because Usually when people want to defend a point, let's say you wanted to defend a point, you go and cherry pick 2 articles, you put them up on a website and say, there you go, there's my evidence, right? But if you're a real scientist, you have to go and read everything. You don't try and defend your point, you try to really see everything that's available. And that's why it took so long. And then after you've read the evidence, then you make up your mind. So it's a heck of a lot more work that way, but you come to a better conclusion.
Yeah, I know the current SPE president, Jason Lyons, he said, part of the reason he's so involved in SPE is because, he wants to create this environment where his kids aren't coming home, because he had the same, scenario. His kids came home and said, Daddy, why are you in like a bad industry? And he's like, whoa, that is not the truth.
I've talked to 3 major companies in the last 3 months, and they did employee surveys and found that their employees are ashamed to work for them. And it's so unnecessary. They should be proud, because if you look at the data, the plastics industry is doing more than anyone to protect the environment, but that's not the online narrative that we're all fed. So that's a problem. You shouldn't have people ashamed of their jobs if there's no need for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, I'd seen something. I think it was from IRG that he had sent the article last week.
Oh yeah.
About how Coca-Cola was once again named by Greenpeace as like the most the biggest plastics polluter, whatever.
Right.
It's like, well, Coca-Cola really like, well, if they're doing PET bottles, I'm pretty sure, it gets recycled a lot more than, than a lot of the other plastics out there. But yeah, it's pretty wild, some of the narratives. So what do you see as the most misquoted plastics myth?
There are so many of them. And if you go to plasticsparadox.com and scroll down, I try to address all the myths. So it will say, question, was there really a straw up a turtle's nose? Or do we really eat a credit card's worth of plastic a week? So I try to address all of them there. And then of course I quote it's not just my opinion. I give sources that refute whatever it is that these people have made up. But the worst one probably is the myth that plastics create a waste problem. I was recently doing some work and I found out, I was reading a book, I turned a page and it showed that plastics are less than 1% of the materials we use. And I was shocked, right? Because we're so obsessed with plastic, nobody comes back and looks at the whole picture, the holistic view. And when I realized that plastics are less than 1% of all the materials we use, I was literally shocked. And then I did some further digging and I found out that plastics are also less than 1% of the waste we create. So It makes me wonder, why is 100% of the money being spent and 100% of the attention on something which is less than 1%? It would be like me going home, tidying my cutlery drawer and expecting the rest of the house to clean itself, right? Obsessing about 1% of something can never solve your problems. So that's probably the biggest one that I see. And in the book, I also mentioned that there's a peer-reviewed study that proves plastics have massively reduced waste, right? So the waste going to landfill and total waste production has gone massively down because of plastics, for the simple reason it takes 3 or 4 pounds of other material to replace 1 pound of plastics. And if you don't believe me, go home and weigh things yourself, right? A paper straw weighs 2 grams, plastic straw weighs 1 gram. A paper bag from Kroger weighs 60 grams. Their plastic bag weighs 5.5 grams, right? So this is not like some wild speculation from me. It's been proven by scientists and you can check it in your own kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my sister's actually lives in just over the border in New York, and I'm in Pennsylvania, and they've actually banned plastic bags from their grocery store. So I take mine, and instead of recycling them, which I was doing, I actually sneak them covertly into New York. So I have a plastic bag smuggling ring, if anyone needs
there you
go. Which is insane because it's like you're saying, it's just one of those blanket, Band-Aid.
Yeah.
For those of you listening to this, I said that in quotation marks. Solutions. It's not actually you're putting the Band-Aid on your knee and your foot is cut off. So,
it's awful.
That's I think that one is probably one of I think that riles me up probably the most.
Yeah. It's just maddening. I have gotten into way too many conversations at the checkout, line of the grocery stores.
They always ask me which paper or plastic, and I say plastics, please. It's better for the environment.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt you, Mercedes, but bags is the worst case of all, right? Because if you were to do an LCA, look for LCA grocery bag, right? Just type it into Google, and I found 25 life cycle analyses on bags, and plastics win every single one ever done in any country in the world, in Sweden, in Denmark, in America, in Canada, in Australia, in Singapore, just a couple of weeks ago. There's 25 studies peer-reviewed by scientists, and everyone says that replacing plastic bags dramatically increases harm. So you'd have to be either, if you're a politician and you voted for that, you'd either have to be too lazy to check the facts, too stupid to understand the facts, or too corrupt to care about the facts. And that's really brutal, but that's the truth, because anyone with Google can find the answer in 10 seconds, or you can go to my website and see that and download the life cycle analyses. So that's really egregious, right? These people who are getting paid to make good decisions are not even checking the facts when they're readily available.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, and part of it too is finding good information, because as you said, you can cherry pick articles that have.
Right. And that's what I said earlier, right? When it comes to life cycle analyses, if I wanted to defend plastics, I'd go and find one that concluded plastics were the greenest solution. I'd stop there, but I didn't. I found 25, and that's more than anyone in the world has. I guarantee you, I've showed that to other companies. Even Dow are shocked that I found that many life cycle analyses on bags, and their job is to sell polyethylene to make plastic bags, and they've come nowhere close to that.
Wow.
So I found everyone, and they all agree. And then I sent it to a life cycle analysis expert, because that's not my area, to make sure that the conclusions were correct.
So how long did it take you to research and write the research for and write the book?
The book, I was on about maybe 500 hours and about 500 articles, something like that.
Wow.
But I didn't stop there. I wanted to get the book out because it's so timely, and I wanted to cover these things and, to be honest, just get the pain over with. Once I had a complete story and I had enough to cover each topic, but I've got about 4 times more information now. It's the largest collection in the world. And yeah, so I'm proud of that. People are shocked. I mean, professional sustainability people with millions of dollars in budget are shocked that I've got more than their whole group has got.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm a bit obsessive about it, but I'm a scientist.
You're so mad. You're so mad about the truth.
That's how angry I am. Exactly.
So with doing all this research and looking into all these peer-reviewed studies, what was the most surprising fact that you were able to uncover? Maybe one that you were kind of like, well, I think I know that, but it turned out even plastics was even better, or something along
right.
those lines.
Well, initially, my biggest surprise was this one, that plastics are actually 0.5% of the materials we use. That was absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
And it's a cliche, but I almost fell out of my chair. My whole world rocked when I saw that and thought, my God. But what became even more shocking was that the environmental groups are doing more to harm the environment than anybody else on the planet.
Wow.
I mean, I can literally prove that they're systematically telling lies just to get donations. They will say anything that sounds scary to get us to open our wallets. And I can prove that because if I look at, I've got a presentation online, and if you look at all the advice they give us about any topic, about dust, about turtles, about bags, about whales, about anything about straws, anything you can name, in every single case, they give the wrong advice, the scientifically proven wrong advice. So they're more about, and there's even people defecting now from these green groups. If you read, there's a book called Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout by Patrick Moore, one of the founders of Greenpeace. And he left. He said he was the last scientist there. They were just money grabbers and he couldn't stand it anymore. So he left and he wrote 2 books showing what money grabbing, corrupt people they are, according to him. I'm not accusing them myself, but according to him, imagine how gut-wrenching it is to leave something that started off with good intentions, and when it morphed into this money-grabbing machine, to have to leave and then expose them. And there's other books. There's one by Bjorn Lomborg, False Alarm, and there's another one by Michael Schellenberger, which is called Apocalypse Never. And these are other ones where prominent environmentalists have left their groups and said these guys are just money-grabbing mythomaniacs.
Mm-hmm. Is there an environmental group that that you've found that is doing the right thing?
I'm sure there are, but I haven't looked into it. I've only looked into the ones that normal people run into. So, for example, the World Wildlife Fund has a page that says that plastic straws last for hundreds of years, and it's a lie, right? It's just untrue. And of course, they give no evidence. So, so I wrote to them like 5 times. I've contacted people from there several times, and they have no interest in changing their page. So anyone could be wrong about something, but if a professional scientist contacts you and says, here's 10 pieces of evidence that proves you're wrong, you've got no evidence on your side, please update your webpage, and they have zero interest in doing it, that kind of shows where their motives are.
Well, if anyone is listening to us out of spite because they don't like plastics and you are a good environmental group, contact us.
I'm sure they are.
We'll
Probably look for one that doesn't make as much money, and they're probably still on the right side of justice.
So how do you combat that? How do you deal with that? You know, that you're reaching out to these groups and trying to help them, trying to inform them. And I mean, what kind of response are you typically met with? Is it just crickets, or is it curiosity?
Changed?
No response.
Does anyone get credit for listening?
In general, if I were to look at environmental groups, the ones I've contacted have had zero interest. They have no interest in the environment, as far as I can tell.
Wow.
So that's sad. When it comes to the general public, it's an interesting split. So I've had, as you said, tens of thousands of interactions on LinkedIn. So if I were to take a guess, I would say about 10% of people actually care enough to go and read the facts and go and look at the evidence, even a few minutes, right? To go to my website, see the peer-reviewed, this is not coming from me, this is peer-reviewed scientific studies from around the world, thousands of them, and you can link to them and you can go and check every word I said, and it's all in quotation marks, right? Because I literally copy and paste from the studies, so there's no spin on it. So there about 10% of people care enough to do that. And then the vast majority of people, and there's another 10% who are just rabid lunatics, right? Who are, it's like a religion for them. It wouldn't matter what facts you show them, they would just be against plastics. And then there's a bunch of people in the middle who don't really care that much. They're kind of virtue signaling. So they're out there claiming to be against plastics, only be like a sheep, right? They're doing it just because that's what's in vogue right now. They look good to their friends, but they don't actually care enough to check the facts. So that seems to be about how it breaks down from what I see. So I've got to resign myself to the fact that I'm only ever going to reach about 10% of people who actually care enough and about facts to look.
Yeah, well, I remember it was like an interaction, I think maybe on Facebook when I still went on there, but it was somebody had posted something about, this is actually a fact that facts don't change people's minds. Stories are the things that actually convince people and change people's minds. And somebody immediately after that commented like, nope, that's not true. And it was like, this is the fact that you're like demonstrating.
Thank you for proving that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, even one of the famous Nazis said, if you repeat a lie big enough times, people will believe it. And that's been scientifically proven. You can just make something up and say it again and again, and even smart people will believe it after a while. Right. And that's the problem. Our industry has allowed this to happen. The Coca-Colas of the world, all the rest of them have sat on their hands for 5 years, allowed lies to be spread. And now we're fighting against the tide because people have already made up their minds based on fiction. And at one point I want to make, because sometimes people say, why should we believe you? You're saying something the opposite of what we've heard before. And I would, so I was thinking about this before the podcast, and I would liken it to hearsay let's say you have a trial, right? And somebody will say, he's guilty, right? I saw him. And then the judge will say, no, that's hearsay. That's inadmissible, right? Because there's no evidence for it. You don't have a picture. You don't have a corroborating witness. You don't have evidence of any kind, right? And so that's the trouble. We have one side who has hearsay. They just make up stuff like a straw lasts 500 years. And then we've got another side that has thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed articles where you can go and check it yourself. So that's the difference. There are two sides, and one of them has the evidence and the other one doesn't. So in a court case, you know which side will win. And so I want to make that point to the viewers, to be wise enough to look at the evidence and see which side has the best evidence.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
So, talking about this, I mean, obviously people have, a responsibility on there, and, because while plastics is usually the greener option, you also have to be responsible with it. So if you were creating a better loop system for PET, for example, where would you start? Whether that be from the design aspect, the, corporation aspect, the personal, the municipalities, where would you start? What needs the biggest fix, I guess, really?
PET is a good example because it is already successfully recycled in huge amounts in some countries. So I know the UK, for example, is thinking about a deposit return system, and they're arguing about whether it works, which is really foolish because Norway's been operating one for years and years, right? They get 97% return of the bottles because the trouble with plastic is it's too cheap, right? So nobody's throwing gold and silver and diamonds away, right? These are the worst things in the world for the environment. Gold, diamonds, platinum, palladium, they're awful, right? And because they're so bad for the environment, because they take so much water and chemicals and energy to make, they're incredibly expensive, and we never throw them away. Plastic is on the other side. So cheap things tend to be green and expensive things tend to be bad for the environment. So there's an irony, right? Plastics are so green and so cheap that we just throw them away and don't think about it. So that's why you need this deposit system. You need to assign a value. So throwing away your PET bottles now like throwing away $1, right? No one's going to throw $1 on the floor, no sane person, right? So that's why Norway has 97% collection rate. Each one's recycled 12 times on average. And they have the same system in Germany. It works exactly the same numbers, and several other countries as well. So we know how to do it, and it is being done. And that's part of this thing that, you know, one country has one piece of the solution, one country has another piece, and we need to not just look in our own area and reinvent the wheel again and again. We need to look around the world and see what's already proven to get the job done.
Yeah, we interviewed Heather McDougall from BOGO Brush a couple weeks ago, a month ago. I don't know. Time has no meaning anymore. And she said something very similar in that, you know, plastics is treated so cheaply, but it is one of our most valuable resources. And I thought that was just so like well put, because it's like, you're right. You know, we should be treating it with more respect and more value. And
Yeah.
because it's so inexpensive, it's not viewed that way sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
She had taken just one economic theory and looked at, you know, I think it was, you know, looking at the finite resources. Right. And so she used the example of gold. She says it's crazy overvalued, like, you know, 400 times, you know, versus plastics, it's just insanely undervalued.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have numbers on that. So how much CO2 is produced to make gold? I think it's 25 tons of waste for every third of an ounce of gold, and it's cyanide runoff water. You know, it's just horrendous.
Wow.
You can look that up. There's actually an online ticker for how much of environmental damage is being done every minute mining gold. And what makes it valuable is the same thing that makes it bad for the environment: the energy and the water and the pollution, all the rest of it. So there's an irony there. Plastics are so green that we throw them away.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But speaking of metals, though, well, why do you think plastics are so easily lumped into one material, whereas most metals are identified by more specific types?
That's a great point. I mean, I teach my daughters, because they're unfortunately exposed to me, how to tell the difference between one piece of plastic and another one. I started teaching them when I was 6 or 7. I said, right, this is polyethylene, that's polypropylene. But most people don't have wacky parents like me. So, you know, if you look at a piece of plastic, they all look the same.
Our kids have wacky parents like you.
Well, congratulations. I'm looking forward to having a beer with you guys. We're on the same wavelength. So, you know, I just teach them these things are different materials, they have different uses, they have different pros and cons, but regular people don't get to learn that. Whereas metals, you know, copper, you'd have to be pretty inept not to be able to tell the difference between copper and steel, or copper and gold, and so forth. So these are things which look different, feel a little bit different, have different densities, whereas plastics don't have that advantage. You know, they could be mainly the color gives somebody an impression I work with designers when I worked for Electrolux Frigidaire. And the designers had not one clue about the plastic, right? All they knew was they wanted it to look like this. And they weren't even aware that you could make the exact same look in 3 different plastics. So we had to teach them, hey, don't go for the most expensive plastic just because the salesman showed it to you in this glitzy color. You know, you could have this half the price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem. You know, it's easy to say, well, copper is worth, you know, some value. Let's strip all the copper wires, or, you know, whatever. And whereas plastic, you're like, you know, I think most people have some idea that some plastics can be, obviously everything's recycled, but when you're talking, you know, municipality curbside stuff, most people kind of go, okay, I think there are some that can be recycled and some that can't. I don't know. And we were talking to the guys from IRG last week, and they were saying, you know, a lot of the problem is you have the people that don't recycle anything because they don't know what can't be recycled. And then you have people that think they're recycling everything.
Recycling, right? The other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. And they're dumping everything in.
Yeah. And you know, it's also that plastics are so new, right? Compared to those other materials, right? They haven't been around very long at all. 1907, right?
That's right.
but, so maybe it is part of, 100 years, maybe 1,000 years from now, will people immediately be able to recognize, the difference, notice the difference between polystyrene and polycarbonate or something like that,
I also think I've seen studies, because I check everything that I start getting interested in. I've seen studies where people react differently to a synthetic picture to a real one, right? So if you see a tree and a butterfly, you automatically think, oh, look how pretty it is. Or even you see a leaf on the floor, right? That's waste, right? But we don't go, oh, what an ugly leaf, it looks nice. So plastic doesn't have that advantage. We've had these other materials around for so long that they look natural to us in some way. Whereas a plastic doesn't have that. You have a gut reaction. This is something, this is a contaminant, this is a pollutant. And we view it unfairly. It's a sort of a plastic racism or a plastophobicity, whatever it would be called.
I like plastophobicity.
Plastophobicity.
It takes me a while to say it, but I like it.
Plastophobicity.
Yeah, I don't think I could say that twice.
And part of it too is, I haven't been in the industry that long, and I wouldn't have known, just like my son, a couple of years ago when I was asking him, hey, what are some common things that you use all the time that are made of plastic, or what's some plastic in this room? And he was wearing, a polyester shirt, and he was like, no, this shirt isn't plastic. I was like, yes, it is. I was like, here, take it off, look at the tag. And he was like, yeah, see, it's polyester. I'm like, that's that's plastic. His mind was blown. So we don't realize, most people don't realize, that our cars are have a ton of plastic in them.
Yeah. Cars are 10%. I just was looking into this last week, so that's why I have the numbers. 10% of the weight of a car is plastic, but 50% of the volume. And if you do the calculation, and I had another expert check this, plastics actually save more oil than they use. So people are always saying plastics use oil and therefore they're bad. And the oil companies want to save themselves by selling more plastics. But if you look into the numbers, because plastics are so light and they save so much weight in cars and increase the miles per gallon, you end up saving way more oil than you use to make the plastics. Overall, even that savings from cars and boats and airplanes overtakes the whole plastic production, not just that used for cars, but all of it. So plastic if the oil people wanted to sell more, oil, they wouldn't be favoring plastics at all.
The other way.
And it's the same with these plastic bag bans. They've done a lot of studies showing when you ban the bags, you end up selling more plastic. So some guy the other day was saying, oh, you would be against bag bans because you're a plastics guy. And I said, well, actually, bag bans increase plastic sales. So if that were my motivation, I would be lobbying for plastic bag bans. Yeah. They end up selling much thicker bags instead of the flimsy ones we get at the supermarket.
I was gonna say, don't people typically go in and then start buying like the garbage bags and stuff like that and using that?
That's right. Yeah,
which is, how is that helpful? But
I talked to a plastic bag company. They make plastic and paper bags, and they said that these bans are fantastic for them, economically, but they're still against them because they're good people and they want to do what's right for the environment.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I feel like there needs to be like, can you go on? Have you already gone on Sesame Street? Like, I feel like it needs to start like this kind of information.
And if you do, can you bring two people along?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I love that. Actually, I was so angry as I started here about the elementary school, and I went and gave a talk for the children. So I took my slides and I made them simple for children with simple messages and analogies. I showed a little cartoon of a guy driving his car into a tree, and he's sitting there on the floor scratching his head. And I said, who's responsible for this? Is it the tree? Is it the car? Or is it the person? And most people, even at the age of 8 or something, knew that it was the person who was responsible. And it's the exact opposite of what we're doing with plastics. We're dropping our candy wrapper on the floor and saying, hey, it's Nestle's fault. We're dropping our PET bottle on the floor and blaming Coca-Cola. I mean, it's absurd. If I drive my car into a tree, I don't call up Ford and ask them to come and take care of it for me. I mean, that's my fault. And we need to spend more time looking in the mirror and realizing where the real problem is and less time trying to blame materials or companies. Right.
But at the same time, it's like, even if people want to do the right thing, I think Eric Larson, who was one of our first podcast guests, he had talked, I talked to him on the phone maybe a year ago about, he can't find a place to recycle his plastic bags. This is a guy who really, really wants to do the right thing, and is making an effort to, and literally nobody around him would take them, Yeah. So,
and they are recyclable. That's the problem. People say they're not recyclable, but they are recyclable. They're just not recycled in his location.
Right.
So that's a terminology problem. It confuses the public.
Yeah, oh yes, I believe me. I try to correct my condo association all the time.
Yeah. Well, I came up with a great analogy. I said to people, if I have a ball, it's kickable, right? I can kick the ball. If I choose not to kick the ball, it's still kickable. the ball didn't change, right? It's the same with recycling. It's a linguistic and scientific fact that these plastics are recyclable, almost all of them, right? More than 90%. It's a fact. There's no arguing. I know Greenpeace, I think, are suing Coca-Cola for misleading people right now. And it's just that I hope they lose, and I hope they get, reprimanded in court for bringing a frivolous lawsuit, because it's a scientific and linguistic fact that they are recyclable. But back to your question about what people could be doing. That is tricky, right? Because you're a regular person, you don't have a PhD in environmentalism. How do you know what's right and what's wrong? So in general, we are wasteful. Where it's actually part of, it's a good sign in a way. When you get rich, you can afford to be wasteful. Poor people are not wasteful. So it's actually a good thing in a weird way that we're able to waste so much stuff, but it doesn't make it virtuous. So we should use less stuff. We should recycle and reduce all of that stuff. But I think people need to change their mindset. So my kids and I don't take a straw at all. People don't need straws. This whole argument about straws is preposterous. And if you do take one, my daughter reused one 100 times. And there's a guy on the internet who I mentioned this to, and now he's up to over 200 times reusing a plastic straw, and every use it gets greener. Of course, you can wash it, you just stick it in the dishwasher and it's all fine. So no one's holding a gun to our heads and making these things single use. You can reuse plastic cutlery. We reuse plastic spoons for years. We've got regular spoons too, but when we're given a plastic one with ice cream, we just keep it in the drawer and reuse it, and adds a splash of color. So I think people are making a mistake there. And the paper straws, on the other hand, we all know how rubbish they were. That's why they got rid of them. They barely last one milkshake, and they're just a soggy mess. So that's what makes them less green.
I think I could probably write a book just on the paper straws, because that's how
you're that angry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty shocking. The straw stuff is really a silly story. I mean, they literally give metal straws to kids at school. My kids got free metal straws at school, and that's about the worst thing you could ever buy from an environmental point of view.
Yeah, and I, honestly, like my kids, like with metal straws, could do a lot of damage just tripping.
There was a death actually. A lady tripped over and had a metal straw, and it killed her.
Yeah, I think I read about that back when it was the straw bans were all coming up. So tell us what your real job is and how does that play into your activism and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a funny thing. So my real job is I'm a scientist, right? I help companies to create better plastics, to solve tough problems. And that's where my money comes from. So whenever people see me talking about this topic, they assume that I'm looking for business. And the irony, and they're like, oh yeah, you're just trying to, generate business or whatever. And you're trying to, you've got adverts on your website. And I'm like, no, the website's 100% free. There's no commercials. They're like, well, you're selling your book. And I said, no, you can download the book for free. I mean, these people are always arguing on virtue and trying to trip you up somehow. I'm like, no, this is all done for free because I believe in the truth, right? And please take a look. So my real job is helping people as a scientist. And the irony of it is that as soon as you say you're a plastics expert, people say, oh, well, we can't listen to you, right? You're a plastics expert. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting line of thought. So you won't listen to a plastics expert about plastics. When you have an appendicitis, do you ask a reporter for their opinion? Do you go to maybe you go to the hospital and ask to speak to the janitor, right? Because God forbid I talk to an actual medical expert, right? So, I mean, and the other day on LinkedIn, somebody said, we can't trust a plastics expert to talk about, a plastic scientist to talk about plastics. And I said, well, who should you go to, a dentist? I mean, the whole thought process is so twisted, it's unbelievable. So, and when you turn it back on these people, I hope they see just how ridiculous that line of argument is. I mean, would you rather trust a scientist with 30 years of experience and a PhD and so forth, who presents evidence you can check yourself? Or would you rather trust somebody off the street who's trying to lever your wallet out of your back pocket for a donation?
I mean, off the street does make it more interesting, but
yeah, let's try that.
So, besides the general public, which we've kind of, discussed in great depths here, what industry or public group or, who would benefit from a plastics re-education the most? Who needs to sit back and think, okay, this is how you're approaching this problem. You need to step back and kind of actually look at the details, and then you can talk to the public again.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a hard one to answer. The first, as you said, is the public, because the public drives everything. There was a recent report by supermarket executives saying, we know that we harm the environment when we replace plastic. We know that. I can send you a link to it. major supermarket executives in England said, we know that we harm the environment by replacing plastic, but we have to do it because our customers want it, right? And it's the same with politicians. Most politicians will do anything as long as they get a vote, right? Because they're just self-interested. So it all starts with the public. As long as the public are deceived and they want something that's harming the environment, people will pander to that need, right or wrong. So the public has to start there. And if it was to come to a number 2 choice, I would say it's politicians. Politicians have a legal and well, in theory, an ethical responsibility to do the right thing. And they've got the budget to do it, right? We're paying them to do the right thing, to look after bigger issues. And so it's shocking to me. I talked to a US senator just last week, and I presented these facts to him. And, these people are not aware. It wasn't a criticism of him. He was a good guy and he took my call, which was a miracle in itself, right? That a senator would talk to just some guy sitting here on his couch. So that was very good of him. But these people, they're not informed, and the people working for them are not informed either. They're just going by the same internet gossip that everyone's relying on. Right. So I think the number 2 would be politicians to stand up and make sure that when they're making a vital decision that they've got the facts in front of them. And they're all on my website. They're in my book. I'll send any politician a free copy of it signed, just so that they can start making smarter decisions.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think, the politics of it get in the way a lot more. If you were to take the public out of it and take the politicians out of it, I don't think anyone else would have a problem. I think most people would try and do the right thing and try and reduce, I remember when, I think it was Nestle started reducing the weight of their PET bottles. And I think it was one of my aunts. I don't know. I won't call them out right now because I can't remember exactly who it was. But someone was like, oh, they're doing this. They're, it's so green. And I remember I was like, it is. I said, but also there is a benefit to them as well. They're using less material and selling the
right.
same product. I said, that's not a bad thing on their end either. Right. And she's like, no, this is all for just being green. And I'm like, all right, yeah. We won't get in that fight right now.
Well, I tell you this, the public doesn't realize this, but this down gauging, which is what we call it, in our field, is just making things thinner and thinner and lighter and lighter. It's been going on for decades, and there are numbers on it. It's dramatic, and it went on long before the environmental stuff was under the spotlight, and it was done for cost reasons. So you're right about that, but it helps everybody. So why not do it?
Right. Yeah. So I think with that, I'm checking our time. We did good. We got our 30 minutes under our belt. I really, we really appreciate you being here. I know we can't get into every detail because we would probably just go on forever. And you can ask Mercedes. I spiral a lot when I see some of these, tweets or LinkedIn,
Instagram ads.
The Instagram ads get me all the time. I will screenshot it and I send it to Mercedes, and I'm like, look at this. This is.
I get those every day. People say, I saw this on LinkedIn, please make a comment. I'd like to close with saying, I don't care about people hating plastics, right? But hate them based on something that's actually true. That's what I care about, right? If people were hating plastics based on things that were actually true, wouldn't be a problem for me, right? Because I'm a scientist. I want to go with where the truth is. Right. But at the moment, my problem is it's complete fiction. And most people are not even decent enough to go and look at the facts, right? They claim to be virtuous. They claim to care. And yet they don't have 30 seconds to go and look at the facts. And that's pretty lame. So either stop claiming to be virtuous or go and check the facts, because you'll get a heck of a surprise when you see them.
Yeah. And Dr. DeArmitt, thank you so much for joining us. And you can definitely check out all of these facts and more on plasticsparadox.com.
Put in the show notes.
Yeah.
We mean not we, but someone will put it in for us.
And you can download the book for free.
Yep, that's right.
Win-win.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, ladies. You've been wonderful. I really appreciate this.
Thanks so much.
Cheers. Okay. Bye-bye.